Silent rancher. Hadn't talked to women in years until 3 Apache women collapsed at his door, pleading for shelter. The Arizona sun, 1887. Sakura, despite her exhaustion, held his gaze, her dark eyes locking with his, unflinching, even though her face was bruised and grimy. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. Her voice was raspy, rough as desert gravel, yet surprisingly steady. "We need shelter," she said. "We don't aim to steal. We just need a place to stay. A few nights. We'll work." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement, an assertion of will from a soul that had endured too much. Finally, Ethan gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a small gesture, yet one that carried the weight of his entire internal struggle. The 3 women froze for a moment, like startled deer. Then Sakura moved first. "If you love cowboy love stories, frontier justice, and Wild West redemption tales, drop a ton of #1 second and your place in the comments. Let's ride this trail together, only on Wild West love." The fading light brought no solace. It seemed instead to sear every exposed inch of skin, baking the air into a dry, breathless kiln. From a distant canyon, a whisper of wind shrieked, like the lost cry of a tortured spirit. And then, amidst that stifling silence, a faint, alien sound intruded. The scuff of loose stones beneath bare feet, feeble yet desperate, fighting to escape the encroaching embrace of the twilight. Ethan Blackwell, a tall, gaunt figure, stood sentinel on his porch, his calloused hand still gripping the half-carved pine. His eyes, cold and blue like tempered steel, narrowed. They were too accustomed to the stark quiet of this land, to the mournful howl of the wind and the solitary cry of the coyote. This sound, this was human, and that was a sound he had spent years trying to avoid. 3 figures materialized slowly from the edge of the dirt trail leading to his ranch, as if they had just clawed their way out of the parched earth itself. They didn't walk, they shuffled. Their clothes were shredded, coated in the rusty dust that blended with the dried streaks of blood and mud. They were 3 women. The last rays of the setting sun cast them in stark relief, turning them into gaunt, desperate sculptures of fear and utter exhaustion. The woman leading them, tall and broad-shouldered, her deep, dark eyes etched with a weary vigilance and an undeniable pain. This was Sakura. Her black hair, pulled back haphazardly with a torn strip of fabric, framed a face that bore long, raw cuts across her arms and a nasty gash at the corner of her lip, making her stoic expression wince with every breath. She moved, each step an agony contained, yet her frame remained defiant, unbroken. Behind her shuffled Willow, her younger sister, and last was little Dove, the youngest, barely out of girlhood. She clung to Willow's back like a shadow, a worn, tattered blanket clutched around her like a flimsy shield against the harsh world. Her wide, frightened eyes darted frantically from the sparse mesquite to the vast, indifferent sky, from the dust-caked ground to the distant, mocking cliffs, searching for a hopeless escape. Every gust of wind that whispered past made her shoulders hunch tighter, her head ducked lower. Ethan stood motionless, a still point in a tableau of silent desperation. His face, weathered by sun and sorrow, betrayed no emotion. He was Ethan Blackwell, a name that once commanded respect, now merely a whispered echo in his own memory. He had been a federal marksman, his hands steady as stone, his aim true as an arrow. But those eyes, those hands, had failed to protect Sarah, his wife, and Lily, their precious child. They hadn't died of illness, as folks in Copperoon whispered. They perished in a bloody sweep he hadn't been a part of, a brutal pacification where soldiers were given free rein to cleanse the frontier. He had found them in the ashes of a small cabin, no trace of an enemy, only the boot prints of federal cavalry. Since then, the very title federal soldier felt like a brand, searing itself onto his soul, a constant reminder of what he had failed to guard, of what he had been complicit in. But now, these 3 small lives stood before him. Their pain was etched into every strained muscle, every flicker of terror in their eyes. He looked at the bruising on Willow's shoulder, the raw tear in Sakura's lip, the uncontrollable trembling of Little Dove. He remembered seeing similar eyes during the war, the eyes of innocent people plundered, abused, stripped of everything. How many times had he stood by, helpless? How many times had he wished he could do something? The ghosts of the past, the horrors he had witnessed and sometimes, unwillingly, been a part of, surged within him, a jarring bell tolling, shattering the ice that had long encased his heart. Sakura, despite her exhaustion, held his gaze, her dark eyes locking with his, unflinching, even though her face was bruised and grimy. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. Her voice was raspy, rough as desert gravel, yet surprisingly steady. "We need shelter," she said. "We don't aim to steal. We just need a place to stay. A few nights. We'll work." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. An assertion of will from a soul that had endured too much. Ethan remained still. He looked at Sakura, at the incredible resilience in her weary eyes. He looked at Willow, still gazing at the ground as if expecting a blow, her body trembling. He looked at Little Dove, huddled behind Willow, her wide, terrified eyes darting endlessly. He had seen faces like these before. Too many times. His jaw tightened. He asked no more questions. There was no need. The bruises, the torn clothes, the sheer terror in their eyes spoke volumes. He glanced toward the barn, then back at them. He took a slow, deep breath, the scent of dry hay and dust filling his lung. Finally, Ethan gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a small gesture, yet one that carried the weight of his entire internal struggle. The three women froze for a moment, like startled deer. Then Sakura moved first. She gently guided Willow forward, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's one last time, a fleeting glance of guarded hope. He didn't stop them. He didn't speak. And crucially, he didn't reach for his pistol. That, more than anything, told them they were safe. For now, he didn't invite them into the house. Not yet. But he swung the barn door wide open. Inside, it was meticulously clean, as he always kept it. Fresh straw lay scattered, the water barrel was full, and extra blankets were neatly folded near the workbench. He had slept in that barn himself more nights than he could count. That night, they slept in the loft. Ethan sat on the porch, his shotgun resting across his thighs. His mind was anything but quiet. Part of him wondered if he was being foolish, letting strangers in, women who might be hunted. Perhaps men were close behind them. Perhaps it was a trap. But then he remembered Willow's limp, the way Little Dove clung to her sister's arm like a frightened child, her voice never rising above a whisper. He remembered how Sakura hadn't flinched, how she had looked him square in the eye, bruised and filthy, and simply said, "We'll work." It was their pain, their vulnerability, and their undeniable strength that had reached him. The next morning, he didn't go to the barn immediately. He chopped firewood, fed the mule, repaired a gate hinge. When he returned, he found his tin cup, cleaned and placed upside down by the basin. The water bucket had been emptied and refilled. Someone had scrubbed the trough, even recoiled the rope he used to haul water from the well. He looked out toward the barn, squinting against the rising sun. Willow stood just outside, scooping hay into the mule's pen. Her movements were careful, slow from her limp, but steady. Her shawl had slipped down her back, exposing her thick, dark hair and the neckline of her torn dress once more. She didn't pull it up right away. Maybe she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She didn't glance at him. Not yet. But he had a feeling she knew he was watching. Inside, Sakura was stacking kindling by the stove, her efficiency unwavering. Little Dove sat near the fence line, half hidden, legs drawn up beneath her dress. She looked toward Ethan briefly, then quickly down again, a timid, bird-like movement. That day, he left food on the porch, smoked meat, a can of beans, coffee grounds. He said nothing, just went back to working the south fence. When he came back, the food was gone, the plate cleaned, left exactly where he'd placed it. The women stayed another night, then another. No demands, no questions, no raised voices. Ethan didn't ask what had happened. But he knew. Not the details, not the names, but enough. Enough to keep the barn door open. enough to lay out 3 more blankets in the loft, enough to sit outside each night with his shotgun resting easy, eyes on the dark line where the hills met the sky. He hadn't wanted company for years, but he wasn't a man to shut the door on someone already torn down, and they weren't asking for much. Not yet. It had been 4 days. Ethan Blackwell didn't count them on purpose. He just knew. He kept track the way he always had, by chores completed, by how many nights the barn lantern had flickered through the slats, by the number of clean tin plates he found waiting for him each morning on the porch rail. The 3 women hadn't left. They hadn't asked to come inside the house either. That mattered to him. He wasn't sure why, but it did. The silence of the ranch no longer felt empty. It resonated with new rhythms, new breaths. And Ethan, for the first time in years, no longer felt utterly alone. The desert nights held a silence so vast, it felt less like an absence of sound and more like a heavy, ancient presence. For years, this silence had been Ethan Blackwell's solace, a balm to the raw wounds of his soul. Now, however, it began to feel different. Not broken, not shattered, but imbued with a new, subtle hum, a fragile undercurrent of life that hadn't been there before. He still sat on his porch, the shotgun across his lap, his gaze fixed on the star-strewn canvas above. But his ears, once tuned only to the rustle of dry brush or the distant cry of a coyote, now strained for other sounds. The soft shifting of straw in the barn, a faint, whispered sigh, perhaps even the ghost of a lullaby carried on the night wind. Inside the barn, the 3 women huddled together on their makeshift beds of straw and borrowed blankets. The air was thick with their unspoken fears, a palpable weight that pressed down on them even in the relative safety Ethan had offered. Sakura, ever vigilant, lay closest to the door, her eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of the night outside, made her muscles tense. She had learned too well that safety was a fleeting illusion, easily ripped away. Her body still ached from the brutal journey, from the fight, from the violations that had scarred her spirit more deeply than any physical wound. She bit back a groan, tasting blood from her still split lip, the metallic tang a stark reminder of the brutality they had escaped. Her mind replayed the screams, the terror, the smoke rising from their destroyed camp near the Verde. Her family, her people, gone, swallowed by the greed and violence of white men. Her heart was a fortress of ice and rage, built to keep the grief from consuming her entirely. Willow lay beside her, curled into a tight ball, her injured ankle throbbing dully. She tried to find comfort in the scratchy wool blanket, but sleep was a distant luxury. Her memories were softer, more fragmented than Sakura's, but no less painful. The hands that had grabbed her, the fear that had stolen her voice, the desperate scramble through the underbrush. She closed her eyes, picturing Ethan's grim, quiet face, his steady nod. A strange, fragile thread of hope had begun to unspool inside her, a feeling she hadn't known she was capable of. It was a dangerous feeling, this hope, in a world that had taught her only despair. She was exhausted, body and soul, her resilience worn thin. The feeling of being completely unmoored, ripped from everything she knew, was a cold, aching void in her chest. Little Dove, the most vulnerable, whimpered softly in her sleep, clutching the worn blanket like a lifeline. Even in slumber, her small body trembled. The trauma of what she had witnessed, what she had almost endured, had stolen her voice, turning her into a phantom of her former self. She rarely spoke, moving like a frightened fawn, her eyes wide and constantly searching for danger. The world had become a place of unpredictable cruelty, and she was a tiny boat, adrift in a vast, dark ocean. Her loneliness was a silent scream, echoing in the vastness of the barn. Days settled into a rhythm, neither planned nor spoken. Ethan rose before first light, a creature of habit and solitude. He lit the stove, split wood with practiced, powerful strokes, the axe biting deep into the logs, and walked the fence lines, his silhouette stark against the dawn sky. But when he returned around mid-morning, things were different. The porch steps had already been swept clean, the ash pan emptied, and the barn mucked out. The women didn't wait for instruction. They worked quietly, diligently, without needing to be asked, without needing to be thanked. They simply did what needed to be done, as if silently asserting their worth, their right to exist in this space. Willow's ankle improved slowly. She still moved with a noticeable limp, a constant reminder of their flight, but she pushed through it with a quiet determination. Ethan would often find her carrying water buckets, her movements careful, almost graceful despite the pain, or washing his extra shirts by the basin without being told to. One morning, he reached for a heavy pail of water, intending to carry it himself, a silent gesture of aid. But Willow, without a word, firmly took it from his grasp. Her fingers, though slender, were surprisingly strong. "I can," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but resolute. Ethan paused, surprised by her quiet defiance, then released the pail. A strange warmth, fleeting but undeniable, touched his chest. It was a long-forgotten feeling, this quiet interaction, this shared purpose. Sakura was harder to read. Her eyes, watchful and guarded, missed nothing. She didn't trust easily. Ethan could see that in the way her shoulders remained slightly tense, the way her gaze constantly swept the perimeter. But she didn't challenge him either. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, inspecting walls, checking the pantry, clearing brush away from the foundation. One afternoon, her voice, still a little hoarse, broke the silence. "Is there a rifle I could use for hunting?" she asked, her eyes fixed on him. Ethan, taken aback by the directness, simply replied he had a spare. She didn't press it further. But from then on, he noticed she meticulously stacked firewood higher, cut more kindling than necessary, and kept that rifle near the door whenever he wasn't home. Her wounds had faded, but her alertness, her fierce protectiveness, had not. She was a silent, watchful shadow, guarding not just her sisters, but also, in her own way, this precarious haven. Her loneliness was a stark, solitary strength, a wall built around her heart. Little Dove remained largely quiet, a tiny ghost haunted by unseen terrors. The girl rarely left her sister's side, her worn blanket still clutched like a shield. She clung to routine like a tether, finding solace in predictability. Twice a day, she meticulously swept the barn, her small broom whispering across the packed earth. She brushed the mule with slow, deliberate strokes, her tiny hands surprisingly gentle. In the evenings, she would sit near Ethan's workbench in the barn, watching him oil tools or hammer new hinges. She didn't ask questions, her presence a silent plea for security, but she stayed close, her eyes often fixed on his calloused hand. She had a habit of humming when she worked, always the same low, comforting rhythm, a faint, mournful tune that filled the air with a strange kind of calm. It was her only voice. She still flinched violently at loud noises, her small body recoiling like a plucked string. She still wouldn't speak a word when men rode by on the far ridge, her eyes fixed on the ground, breath held tight. Her silence was a monument to her terror, a constant, aching reminder of her profound desolation. It was the third morning when Ethan found himself standing by the woodpile, watching them move through the yard. Not for any particular reason. He was just there. They didn't belong to him, and he didn't belong to them. But something had shifted. The ranch, once a hollow echo of his loss, now held a faint, living pulse. He found himself no longer listening for silence, but for their movements. The soft scuff of Willow's bare feet on the pine floor, Sakura's steady rhythm as she stirred the bean pot, Little Dove dragging a chair across the floor with a little too much noise. It should have annoyed him years ago. It might have. Now, he found himself waiting for it, a quiet anticipation building within him. Their presence, though born of tragedy, was slowly, almost imperceptibly, filling the vast emptiness he had meticulously cultivated around himself. The solitude that had once been his comfort now felt less complete. That evening, as the last sliver of sun dipped behind the ridge, Sakura came inside, carrying 2 rabbits she had trapped. Her tunic sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, capable forearms, her skirt muddy to the knees. Ethan sat at the table, mending a tear in his saddlebag. "Boil them," Sakura asked, motioning toward the rabbits with a slight tilt of her head. He nodded. Use the garlic in the jar above the hearth. Little salt. You know how to cook. A faint, almost imperceptible softening crossed her face. My wife used to, he said, the words surprising even himself. He hadn't spoken of Sarah in years. Sakura paused, her head tilted, studying him. You never remarried? She asked. He didn't answer that. Didn't need to. The silence that followed was not empty, but heavy with shared, untold histories. That night they all ate together. The first time. No words about it. No ceremony. Just 4 tin plates and a shared pot, steam rising into the cool air. Little Dove, almost a whisper, said thank you. Willow watched him as she ate, her eyes resting on his hands more than his face, a silent, tentative question in her gaze. After supper, as they cleared the table, Willow lingered behind while Sakura helped Little Dove to the barn. You married long? She asked quietly, her eyes on the empty plate in her hands, her voice barely a breath. 8 years. Did you love her? Ethan didn't look at her. He stood by the stove, feeding in one more split log, the crackle of the fire a counterpoint to the quiet intimacy of their conversation. Yes. Willow nodded slowly. She didn't cry. But her next question came after a long silence. Did she die here in the house? Number in town. His voice was flat, controlled, a locked door. Measles took her. And the baby. Willow's hand twitched at the plate. A small, involuntary tremor. I'm sorry. He didn't reply. She set the plate down gently. As she turned to go, he spoke again, his voice low, rough with disuse. You ain't safe yet. She stopped, her back to him. Conrad and his men, he continued. You think they're still looking. I know they are. He turned, looking at her straight, his gaze firm. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't nothing either. It was a declaration, a quiet, unwavering commitment. Later that night, when the house had gone still and the oil lamp was turned low, Ethan sat at the edge of the porch again. He didn't sleep much these days, never had. The sound of crickets buzzed out in the brush, and an owl called once from the canyon mouth. The barn door creaked slightly. He looked up. Willow stepped out, wrapped in the same patched shawl she had worn the first night. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, a dark cascade. She didn't speak. She walked to the steps, stood beside him, then slowly sat down, leaving space between them, but not much. After a while, she whispered, Why'd you let us stay? He thought about that. Because of the bruises? Because of the silence? Because he'd seen too many people turned away for too little? He shook his head once. Didn't seem right to send you off. She nodded. Quiet for a while. Then, some folks would have. I ain't some folks. She smiled faintly, a ghost of a smile, and that was it. No more words, no touching, just 2 people sitting in the dark, the vast, lonely desert stretching around them, not running, not asking, just staying. Their shared solitude was slowly, quietly, being transformed into something else. In the days that followed the silent confrontation on the porch, a subtle tension permeated the ranch. The peace wasn't absolute, it was fragile, like ice on a winter pond, threatening to crack at any moment. Ethan continued his work, but his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, his Winchester never far from reach. Sakura, now, carried Ethan's old rifle herself when she went to check traps or forage for wild greens. She moved like a phantom warrior, her sharp gaze missing no shift of the wind, no faint print in the yielding soil. Willow and Little Dove still held their guard, but a new, rare warmth, a slight easing, had begun to infuse their movements, especially when they were near Ethan. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, all 4 of them sat gathered. The warm bean stew sent comforting tendrils of steam into the air, and Little Dove, for the first time in months, hummed a faint broken tune of her tribe. That humming, a fragile thread, seemed to stitch their lonely souls together in the small room. Ethan watched them, watched the fading scars on their skin, knowing the deeper scars on their spirits remained. He placed a crumpled, old piece of paper on the table. It was a wanted flyer, crude sketches, yet unmistakably accurate. Sakura's angular face, Little Dove's timid eyes, and even Willow, with her neckline drawn lower than in real life. Large letters beneath read, "Fugitive property, stolen from contract. Reward paid upon return. Signed, Conrad." The air in the room instantly solidified. Little Dove's humming died. She stood, retreating behind Willow, trembling like a dry leaf. He found us," she whispered, her voice a fragile, breaking string. Ethan looked up, his gaze steady. "He hasn't," he said, his voice low and firm. "Not yet." Sakura stared at the flyer, her hands clenched into fists. "He will." "Not here," she said, her voice filled with grim determination and a deep, raw terror. "We'll leave before dark." Ethan didn't move. "You're not going anywhere." He looked straight into Sakura's eyes, an unyielding defiance in his own. "You're right," he's still looking. "Running now won't help. You've got food. You've got walls. And you've got someone who will shoot back if it comes to that." Sakura didn't argue, not because she agreed, but because she knew he wasn't wrong. Her heart felt heavy. Running had been her instinct for too long. She was accustomed to the cold, aching feeling of leaving everything behind. But now, the thought of thrusting Willow and Little Dove into danger again, into the brutal desert night, made her falter. The loneliness of a woman who had nothing left to lose now grappled with the terrifying fear for those she loved. After the dishes were done, Willow lingered, while Sakura and Little Dove went to the barn. She came to Ethan, where he sat oiling his rifle. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly, her deep blue eyes searching his with a profound curiosity. She stood in the doorway, barefoot, in her patched dress. Ethan looked up. "You didn't do anything to deserve what was done to you," he said, his voice low and weary. "That's enough." Willow nodded, then slowly walked over and sat beside him, not too close, but closer than before. I wasn't touched," she said after a moment of silence, her voice a faint sigh. "Not like Sakura was, or what they tried with Little Dove. They tried with me too, but I ran, and I kept running. I didn't stop." The haunting memory clung to her, a phantom of invisible defilement. Her loneliness wasn't a lack of kinship, but the profound absence of someone who truly understood the weight of being hunted, of being humiliated. Ethan didn't look at her. He set the rifle down. "Doesn't matter if they got close or not," he said. "You carry it just the same." Willow looked at his hands, rough and scarred. Then she gently placed hers over his. Her hand was small, but surprisingly warm. "I know you carry things too," she whispered. They didn't speak for a long while after that. Then Willow gently leaned her head on his shoulder. Just once, just long enough for the world to quiet, and Ethan didn't pull away. A soft breeze carried the scent of dry earth and pine needles. In that moment, their shared loneliness seemed to merge, forming a common sorrow, a wordless comfort. A week passed after the flyer was spotted, no new strangers appearing. But the tension remained, a tight string stretched in the air. Sakura took to walking the perimeter twice a day, always with Ethan's old Winchester strapped to her back. She said little, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. The bruises on her arms had faded, but the guarded way she stood had not. Ethan didn't stop her. He had seen women break from silence before, but Sakura wasn't breaking. She was sharpening. Little Dove had begun to speak in full sentences again, especially around the animals. She helped brush down the mule every morning, fed the chickens without being told, and sat near Ethan's workbench in the barn in the evenings, quietly watching him oil tools or hammer new hinges. She didn't ask questions, but she stayed close, her silent presence a small warmth in his life. Ethan had noticed something too, something he hadn't expected. He no longer listened for silence. He listened for their movements. A faint creak of the porch, Willow's soft humming over the bean pot, Little Dove dragging a chair across the floor a little too loudly. Years ago, it might have annoyed him. Now, he found himself waiting for it. That morning, while stacking lumber near the barn, Willow came out with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to him. He took it with a nod. "I fixed the hem on that flannel shirt you left by the wash basin," she said. "Seemed a waste to throw it out." "It was," he said. She smiled a little, her eyes squinting in the sun, then turned and leaned against the fence beside him. "You always been alone since her?" she asked. "Mostly. No brothers, folks?" "Dead long before." She nodded, taking a slow sip. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked. "Number. Why not?" Ethan glanced at her. "I built it with her. Every board, every gate, every inch of fence. Don't know how to leave that behind." Willow's hand rested on the top rail. Her fingers brushed his by accident. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. "We never had a place," she said quietly. "Not really. Camp to camp. Army moved us twice. Then the traders. Then Conrad." She looked toward the hills. "This place. It's the first time I ever slept without dreaming of running." Ethan didn't answer, but something in his chest shifted. Not pain, not comfort either, just a familiar weight. That evening, as dusk settled in, a rider approached, not a stranger this time. Tom Belden, a local from Copper Run, rode up the trail and dismounted by the fence. Ethan met him outside, rifle resting under one arm, not lifted, but visible. Tom raised a hand. "Ain't trouble. Just came to warn you." "Warn me?" "There's talk in town. That bounty hunter Conrad is asking about 3 Apache girls that went missing near the Verde. Claims he paid for 'em. Says they're runaways. No proof, just noise. But he's putting up flyers, offering coin." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Town marshal ain't lifting a finger. Says he don't meddle with property disputes unless they're in town limits." Ethan didn't respond, just nodded once. Tom glanced toward the barn. "That flyer reaches the wrong sort. They'll come sniffin'. I'm away." Tom reached into his saddlebag, handed him a folded sheet. The flyer. It showed sketches. Crude but unmistakable. Sakura's angular face. Little Dove's timid eyes. Even Willow's neckline drawn lower than in real life. Beneath it read, "Fugitive property, stolen from contract. Reward paid upon return." Ethan folded the paper slowly and shoved it into his coat. "You sure you know what you're doing, Maddox?" Tom asked. "I do." Tom tipped his hat and rode off. That night, Ethan brought the flyer inside. Willow was at the stove. Sakura and Little Dove sat near the table. The moment he laid it down, the air changed. Little Dove stood. "He found us." Ethan looked at her. "He hasn't. Not yet." Sakura's hands curled into fists. "He will. Not here." Willow stepped forward, her eyes scanning the sketch of herself. "You don't ever have to do this," she said. "You didn't ask for us. I didn't ask for trouble either," Ethan said. "But it came, and you're still here. That means something." He looked at Willow. "I can go into town tomorrow. Make it legal." Sakura stiffened. "Legal how?" "A name on paper means no man can claim you," Ethan said. "Not even Conrad. If I marry one of you, the law protects you." Little Dove's breath caught. Sakura frowned. "That's not what we want." "I'm not offering it as a bargain," Ethan said. "You don't owe me a damn thing, but it's what I can do, and I won't do it unless one of you says it yourself." The room was silent long enough for the fire to pop. Then Willow stepped forward. "I'll take your name," she said. Her voice trembled but was firm, a whisper that mingled with the crackling fire. Sakura looked at her, surprised, but said nothing. Willow moved to Ethan's side. "I'm not doing it to hide," she said. "I'm doing it because I feel safe here for the first time. Because you didn't ask me for anything. Because you stayed." Ethan's chest rose once. Then he nodded. "Then we go tomorrow." And just like that, the decision was made. No rings, no fancy dress, no formal proposal. But for Willow, it meant survival. And for Ethan, it meant something else entirely. Something he hadn't let himself want in a long time. A reason to stay alive. A fragile thread of hope, ignited amidst the shadows of prejudice and danger. The morning after their return from Copper Run, a fragile peace settled over Ethan's ranch, heavy with unspoken questions. Willow, though now legally bound to Ethan, moved with a newfound quiet grace, a delicate strength blooming amidst her lingering fear. She'd begun to hum again, soft and low, as she helped Sakura tend the meager winter garden or brush the mule. Ethan often found himself listening for her footsteps, for the quiet rhythm she brought to his solitary world. He would watch her, a faint, unnamed hope stirring in his chest, a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. They had faced Conrad once, and he had retreated. Perhaps, just perhaps, this fragile truce would hold. The early winter snow had begun to dust the higher ridges, turning the mornings bitter cold. Ethan spent his days reinforcing the cabin, building a second chimney for the barn stove, patching leaks in the roof. He'd spent 15 winters out here alone. He knew what was coming, but this one felt different. Willow now slept in his bed each night, her presence a warm, anchoring weight against the cold emptiness that had consumed him. She didn't ask. She simply came to him, a silent understanding passing between them. Her clothes folded beside his, her hand resting over his in the dark, small acts that rebuilt a life he thought was forever shattered. One biting afternoon, Willow, her movements a little slower, a little more deliberate, stood by the stove, stirring coffee. Her hand unconsciously drifted to her lower belly. When she felt Ethan's eyes on her from his rocking chair by the window, she turned, her gaze direct, luminous. "I think it's real," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and a nascent, trembling joy. He stood, crossing the room to her, and placed his hand over hers. "Then it's ours," he said, his voice husky. Her eyes, wet but steady, searched his face. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I never thought I'd be a father again. Never thought I deserved to be. But this ain't about the past." The future, for a fleeting moment, felt tangible. Just then, Sakura entered, carrying a bundle of kindling, the raw cold clinging to her shoulders. "Deer tracks near the edge of the ridge," she announced, dropping the wood by the stove. "Small ones. Might be a late buck. Could be meat." Her eyes flickered between Ethan and Willow, noticing Willow's hand still resting on her belly. A flicker of something, surprise, then a subtle softening, crossed Sakura's hardened gaze, though she said nothing aloud. "I'll hunt it," Ethan said, the prospect of fresh meat welcome. "I'll go with you," Sakura replied instantly. He nodded. They left at midday, the snow light, barely covering the ground, just enough to quiet the world underfoot. They rode towards the ridge in silence. That night, they returned with the meat. Little Dove ran to meet them in the yard, barefoot in the snow, until Sakura barked at her to go back inside. Willow stood on the porch, both hands clasped, waiting. When Ethan climbed the steps, she took one look at him and nodded. "I'm sure now," she said quietly. "My moon missed again, and I know." He wrapped his arms around her without a word, pulling her close. The storm outside was building, but inside that cabin, it was warm, and they stayed. But that fragile peace, built on hope and defiance, was not meant to last. The biting wind howled through the canyon mouth, a banshee's cry that pierced the early morning silence. It was colder now, the kind of deep, unforgiving cold that crept into bones. Ethan, already on the porch, rifle across his lap, felt it like a premonition. He scanned the horizon, then the tree line, his eyes narrowing. Not just 4 riders this time. This was an entire troop, at least 10 dark silhouettes cresting the distant ridge, moving with grim, purposeful intent. Conrad. He was back, and this time he wasn't alone, and he wasn't here to parley. "Sakura, Little Dove, get inside." Ethan bellowed, his voice raw with sudden urgency. He grabbed his rifle, chambering a round with a sharp click. Sakura, already alert, snatched her Winchester from its resting place by the door. Willow, startled awake, stumbled out of the bedroom, clutching Little Dove close, her eyes wide with terror. The riders stormed into the ranch yard, ignoring the fences, their horses' hooves thundering on the frozen ground. Yells and curses filled the crisp air. Ethan fired the first shot, hitting a man in the shoulder, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. Sakura returned fire with fierce precision, each shot finding its mark, but they were too few. "Conrad!" What do you want? Ethan roared, reloading frantically. I came for what's mine, Maddox. Conrad's voice boomed, sharp as cracking ice. And I'm taking